The rush to build wind farms to combat climate change is colliding with preservation of golden eagles, iconic birds in the western United States.
Investigators are looking into a golden eagle that was shot in Potter County last week.
So, Wyoming just did something that nobody saw coming. We're talking 1,000 golden eagles, deployed to reclaim lands that had been entirely ruined by decades of overgrazing. Within just a few years, those eagles had reclaimed almost 2 million acres. So, how did the birds actually pull it off? And how is this going to change the story of environmental conservation forever? Join us as we break down the shocking high-stakes story of Wyoming's golden eagle experiment.
Combined risks to golden eagles, including wind power, are leading scientists to monitor the birds.
Wyoming's groundbreaking idea that shocked the world. The Wyoming Golden Eagle Project is like no other. Take a moment to think about a large piece of land that had been written off. Well, Wyoming wasn't happy about the situation, so they released not a handful, not a test group, but 1,000 golden eagles into it. Golden eagles are the lions of the bird world, apex predators dropped straight into a broken land. At first, people watched the skies and waited for a miracle, but what happened next was not what they expected. The land reacted. The animals reacted. And some of the changes were so unsettling that researchers stopped calling it a success story and started asking whether they had pushed nature too hard, too fast. According to experts, it was the beginning of another disaster. But how did it all go wrong? Stay with us for the full story that will blow your mind. This story begins in Wyoming's Red Desert Highlands, a place with tall grasses and soil soft enough to drink in rain. Sadly, by 2019, that memory had nearly faded. What stretched across the horizon now was a vast sweep of pale brown earth, beaten flat and stiff, like it had been packed down with a giant hand. We are talking about over 2 million acres that had been grazed repeatedly for over 100 years. Cattle hooves pressed the ground season after season, year after year, until the soil stopped acting like soil at all. It no longer breathed. It is no longer absorbed. It simply sat there, dry and tight, waiting for the next insult. The plants that once held this land together were gone. Western wheatgrass, blue grama, and Indian ricegrass, plants with long roots that reached deep and stitched the soil into place, had slowly disappeared. They could not survive constant pressure without rest. In their place came cheatgrass, an invader that spreads rapidly and dies young. It grows shallow and thin, providing little food for animals and no real grip on the soil. By early summer, it dries out completely, turning whole valleys into fuel. Fire seasons grew longer. Flames moved faster. When cheatgrass burns, it returns even thicker, pushing native plants farther out. It was chaos, nature at its worst. Rain no longer brought relief. When storms rolled in, the water hit the ground and had nowhere to go. Instead of soaking in, it ran across the surface like water on concrete. Small streams turned violent within minutes. Topsoil was peeled away and carried downstream. What remained was powder and stone. Each storm took a little more life with it. The land could not heal because it could not even hold water long enough to try. For ranchers, this was not a funny issue. Cattle need energy to live and weight to sell. As forage quality dropped, cows had to walk farther to eat enough to survive. Every extra mile burned calories that never came back. A cow that spends all day searching for poor grass does not gain weight. It barely holds on. Ranch families watched animals grow thinner while expenses climbed. Fuel costs more. Feed supplements cost more. Land leases expanded because each cow now needed more acres than it did 10 years earlier. And what next? Profit margins began to vanish. The truth is that many ranchers inherited this work. Some were 4th or 5th generation.
The president says the move will help bring down record-high beef prices while also helping Argentina's struggling economy.
Holding land that had been passed down like a family name. To these farmers, selling cattle at a lower weight meant borrowing more money. Borrowing more money meant more risk. One stormy winter or one bad fire season could end a legacy that had lasted a century. The land was failing them, and they were failing the land, even if neither side wanted that outcome. While the damage above ground was apparent, something else was happening just beneath the surface. Stay tuned, because what you are about to witness is genuinely shocking. As the land began to fade, prairie dogs moved in quietly, and then all at once. These small animals love short grass. It lets them see danger coming. They expanded their colonies outward, burrow by burrow, acre by acre. Prairie dogs help the soil in ideal situations. For instance, they dig tunnels that bring air underground. Their waste adds nutrients, but balance matters. Without balance, helpers become destroyers. In the Red Desert, prairie dog numbers exploded.
Prairie dogs have torn up airport runways, they've infiltrated cemeteries, and halted developmental progress.
Densities that should have stayed around 10 or 15 animals per acre climbed to 50 or 60. At that level, they ate faster than plants could recover. Roots were chewed down before they could grow. New shoots vanished as soon as they appeared. Entire pastures began to look scraped clean, like the surface of the moon. Cattle and prairie dogs now competed for the same scraps of green, and neither was winning. The biggest problem was not the prairie dogs themselves. It was what was missing. You see, for decades, the region had lost its top predators. Wolves had been driven out long before. Grizzly bears no longer roamed these plains. Mountain lions stayed closer to rocky edges and higher ground. The system had lost its natural breaks. Without those controls, smaller predators filled the gap. Coyotes thrived. Intelligent, adaptable, and fearless, they multiplied quickly. With little competition and plenty of open space, their numbers surged. Coyotes do eat prairie dogs, but they follow opportunity. In the Red Desert, a different meal became easier. Newborn pronghorn antelope and mule deer fawns were vulnerable, slow, and unprotected in open country. Coyotes learned the timing. They knew the places. In some areas, biologists recorded fawn losses as high as 80% within the first month of life. Wyoming's pronghorn population had once reached over 1 million. By the late 2010, it had fallen to around 400,000. Mule deer were also being reduced at a shocking rate. Weather and disease also did not help matters. By this point, the land was trapped. Overgrazing fed prairie dogs. Prairie dogs blocked plant recovery. Coyotes reduced wildlife. Poor forage hurts cattle. No single fix in sight. And that was when the story changed. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department proposed a plan that sounded unreasonable to almost everyone who heard it. Instead of fencing, poisoning, or reseeding alone, what if they brought back a predator that still existed in the region? The golden eagle. In case you've never seen one, golden eagles are large, powerful, and visible from far away. With wingspans that stretch over 7 feet and eyesight many times sharper than a human's, they rule open skies. They hunt from above, relying on height and speed rather than numbers. The department planned to release 500 golden eagles over 5 years, starting with juveniles sourced from other areas. The idea was not about killing everything in sight. It was about pressure. Golden eagles prey on prairie dogs. They also target young coyotes. More importantly, the department believed that their presence would turn the story around. Animals that know they can be seen from the sky act differently. They hide more. They move less. They take fewer risks. Biologists believed that fear itself could slow destruction enough to give the land a chance to breathe. But there was a problem. Some ranchers believed that it was a bad idea. People complained about newborn calves, about compensation, about whether the state truly understood life on the ground. Some feared the plan would trade one problem for another and leave families to bear the cost. Stakes were high, and there was zero trust. Nobody wanted to risk the last working years of their ranch on a theory. After much debate, funding was approved for the proposal. Biologists prepared release sites and monitoring plans. What happened next? Keep watching to find out. Arrival of Wyoming eagles. Spring 2020 was when the experiment truly began. The first 50 young golden eagles were released into Wyoming's highlands. There were no issues at first, just new shadows moving slowly across a landscape that had been stuck for a long time. Each eagle carried a small, solar-powered tracker, carefully fixed to its back. The devices sent signals to satellites, telling biologists where the birds flew, rested, hunted, and whether they survived. Every movement mattered. Golden eagles can move over hundreds of square kilometers, and no one knew how far these young birds would go once released. According to sources that monitored the project, some of the birds drifted quickly, toward ridgelines. Others waited near the release zones. A few vanished within weeks, victims of starvation, exposure, or inexperience. That loss was expected. Studies from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service already showed that nearly half of juvenile golden eagles do not survive their first year in the wild. For the first few months, the land did not change. Prairie dog towns were moving at will. From a distance, it seemed like the critics were right. 50 birds scattered across millions of acres looked too small to matter. Even the tracking data appeared dull at first. Lines on maps spread out but showed no evident pattern. The sky had changed, but the ground seemed to be stubborn and unmoved. Then the numbers started to change. Motion sensors placed near prairie dog colonies recorded something odd. First, surface activity dropped sharply in areas where eagle flight paths crossed again and again. In some zones, daytime prairie dog movement fell by nearly 40%. Yet carcass counts did not rise. There were no piles of remains, no sign of mass killing. The math did not add up if death was the explanation. The answer was not in how many prairie dogs were gone. It was in how many refused to come out. Remember that prairie dogs are social animals. They are alert, vocal, and constantly watching the sky. Golden eagles hunt from above, using height and speed, and prairie dogs know that shape. The shadow alone is enough.
To find out, Lloyd has come to Scotland to put his golden eagle Tilly to the test. First, he needs something for her to hunt.
With eagles circling overhead, the rodents changed their daily routine. Instead of spending long hours clipping grass and extending tunnels, they stayed close to burrow mouths. Many stayed underground for most of the day. Feeding runs became short and cautious. They began choosing safety over expansion. Colonies that had been spreading outward slowly pulled inward. Tunnel digging slowed. Vegetation just beyond the burrow edges stopped being chewed down to bare soil. For the first time in years, plants were given time. Not much time, just enough. That small opening changed everything. In patches under regular eagle patrol routes, green began to return. Indian rice grass pushed up thin blades. Needle and thread grass followed, although they were sparse at first, but they grew thicker. These plants send roots deep into the soil, sometimes several feet down. Where they grow, water stays longer. Soil holds together instead of breaking apart. But that wasn't all. Biologists measured soil moisture in these early recovery spots and found increases of up to 15% compared to nearby areas without eagle activity. That difference meant rain soaked in instead of running off. It also meant less erosion during storms. Don't get it wrong, the land was not healed, but it was no longer completely helpless. What mattered most was that none of this required the eagles to wipe anything out. A golden eagle eats roughly 1 to 2 pounds of food per day. Even 50 birds could never consume enough prairie dogs to explain the change on, say, their own. The power came from presence, from risk, from the knowledge that danger could come from above at any moment. Ecologists have a name for this force. They call it the landscape of fear, like a situation where prey animals map danger onto their surroundings and adjust behavior long before teeth or talons touch them. And this wasn't the first time we've witnessed this phenomenon. Back in Yellowstone, wolves created this effect by forcing elk to avoid open riverbanks. In Wyoming's highlands, golden eagles created it from the sky. Fear cut the excesses of these predators without erasing life. Prairie dogs remained part of the system. They simply stopped overrunning it. The good news is that vegetation responded almost immediately, not everywhere, but in enough places to matter. These islands of recovery began connecting slowly, patch by patch, season by season. By late summer, tracking data showed that the surviving eagles had started to settle. Territories formed along ridges and open flats where hunting was efficient. Juveniles that made it through their first months grew stronger and more confident. Flight paths became consistent. The pressure became predictable, and that predictability was what locked the new behavior into place. Researchers watching the data understood they were seeing something larger than predator and prey. They were watching a broken system. The grass did not return in waves or carpets. It came slowly. A little more green here, a thicker patch there. Enough to signal that the soil still knew what to do when given a chance. Enough to suggest that the damage above ground had never entirely erased what waited below. By the time autumn arrived, the land looked different to those who knew where to look. Prairie dog towns were still present, but less aggressive. Bear zones had softened at the edges. The first release had not fixed the red desert, but it had cracked the lock that kept it stuck. Winter was coming. More eagles were already planned for release. And with every shadow that crossed the ground, the highlands showed new signs, ones that would soon reach beyond prairie dogs and plants into the broader web of life and nature. It worked like magic, and that's exactly what we'll show you next. Stay with us. The Wyoming golden eagle's magic. By 2021, the highlands of Wyoming were no longer the same empty sky they had been for decades. The first batch of eagles had grown into young adults, and the second release added another 100 birds to the party. That extra 100 extended the reach of the eagle patrols, increasing the areas under constant watch from above. The juveniles that had survived the first year were now finding mates. Golden eagles do not pair up easily. They choose partners for life and stake out territories that can stretch across more than 100 square kilometers. We mentioned earlier that the prairie dogs felt it first. The small rodents had learned quickly that the shadows above were dangerous. When more eagles occupied the highlands, prairie dog towns were reduced further. Colonies that had been sprawling unchecked were now limited to tight clusters around burrow entrances. Surface activity dropped sharply, not because the birds were eating them, but because the rodents had adapted. They spent more time underground, moving only in short bursts to feed or extend tunnels.
discovered plants here that can remove toxic heavy metals accumulated in soil.
With less grazing pressure, the soil and the plants under the Eagle Patrol zones finally began to expand. Native perennial grasses that had disappeared over decades of overgrazing began to reappear. Indian ricegrass, needle and threadgrass, and western wheatgrass pushed shoots through compacted dirt, roots sending tendrils deep to hold soil and retain moisture. The eagles did not stop at prairie dogs. Juvenile coyotes became new targets. Golden eagles cannot tackle a full-grown coyote safely, but the younger ones were vulnerable. By preying on juveniles, the eagles indirectly trained the adults to adjust their behavior. Coyotes shifted their activity to the night, mainly becoming nocturnal hunters in areas patrolled by the birds. That simple change rippled through the ecosystem. Predation on pronghorn antelope and mule deer fawns dropped during daylight hours, giving the newborns a critical window to feed, grow, and survive. Survival rates soared. In some pronghorn populations, fawn survival nearly doubled, climbing from 20% to almost 40%. Mule deer fawns experienced a similar improvement. For the first time in decades, the ungulate populations were stabilizing without human intervention. As wildlife began to respond, the grasslands improved as well. Less pressure from prairie dogs meant the vegetation had a chance to recover. Native grasses are denser and more nutrient-rich than the invasive cheatgrass that had long dominated. Cattle feeding on these plants no longer need to roam for hours to find enough nutrition. Less. Walking meant less energy burned, which translated into healthier, heavier animals. Ranchers noticed their herds looking fuller and firmer. Coats shone, body condition scores rose, and calves grew fatter. However, that wasn't all, though. Market weights also improved substantially. On some ranches, cattle were 50 to 60 pounds heavier per head than in previous years. For a herd of 500, that added up to 25 to 30,000 pounds of additional sellable beef. At $1.50 per pound, that was more than $35,000 in extra revenue, money that turned skeptical ranchers into cautious supporters of the Eagle program. By 2022, these effects were apparent across much of the Red Desert. The combination of prairie dog contraction, changes in coyote behavior, and healthier vegetation created a cascade that spread through the entire ecosystem. Ranchers who had once questioned the idea of apex predators in their skies could not ignore the evidence. Healthier cattle meant better income. Wildlife populations were stabilizing. Grass was returning. Soil was holding together. The landscape that had seemed hopeless a few years earlier was responding, and all of it traced back to the golden eagles above. The program continued to expand. Guess what? By 2023, Wyoming had released a total of 350 golden eagles. Monitoring data showed measurable recovery across the eagle-managed zones. Native grass cover had increased by more than 1/3, a dramatic improvement compared to pre-reintroduction levels. Sage grouse, birds that are extremely sensitive to habitat quality, began to rebound.
The sage grouse is a small ground-dwelling bird. Its population has declined over the years.
Their populations climbed by nearly 20%, confirming that the habitat was truly recovering on a large scale. Pollinator insects and wildflowers returned as well, signaling that the soil was healthy enough to support the broader ecosystem. Lupine, balsam root, and prairie coneflower spread across open meadows, adding color to the landscape and food for bees and butterflies. Additional raptors began moving into the restored areas. Ferruginous hawks, prairie falcons, and even a few bald eagles arrived, not to compete, but to carve out their own niches. Each predator managed its preferred prey, creating overlapping layers of influence across the landscape. The golden eagles kept prairie dogs and juvenile coyotes in check. Hawks hunted ground squirrels, and falcons focused on smaller birds. Biologists began pointing to Wyoming as a model for the American West. Montana, Colorado, and New Mexico showed interest in similar restoration strategies. The project demonstrated the power of a trophic cascade. Apex predators do more than consume prey. They influence behavior, reshape landscapes, and restore balance across entire food webs. Just like wolves in Yellowstone changed riverbanks and willow groves by controlling elk behavior, golden eagles in Wyoming restored grasslands, stabilized soil, and protected wildlife while simultaneously supporting human livelihoods. The experiment proved that predators are not just another part of an ecosystem. They are the operating system that keeps it running smoothly. Economics and ecology met in a way few had expected. The program cost $8,200,000 over 5 years, but the returns were far higher. Cattle productivity alone generated an estimated $30 million in additional revenue for ranchers during that period. Every dollar invested in the Eagle program produced nearly $4 in profit from ranching gains alone. The benefits did not stop there. Healthier grasslands improved water retention, reduced erosion, sequestered carbon, and even attracted tourists and hunters who had avoided the degraded landscape in earlier years. By the end of 2023, the Red Desert Highlands looked like a different place. Eagles soared above landscapes that had been stripped to dirt just a few years earlier. Grass stretched green across hillsides, pronghorn and deer fawns thrived, wildflowers carpeted previously barren flats, and raptor communities had layered themselves naturally across the ecosystem. Skepticism had given way to caution. The Golden Eagle program was no longer an experiment. It had become a blueprint for how, when nature is restored carefully, it can repair itself and support human communities in the process. The land was still fragile, and the work was far from finished, but the message was clear. Apex predators, when returned to their proper place, can reboot ecosystems in ways humans cannot fully replicate. Thank you for staying with us. Are you thrilled by Wyoming's land reclamation project? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the video below to watch it.